We're a nonprofit organization dedicated to eradicating human slavery, human trafficking, child exploitation, and child sexual abuse material through disrupting networks and applying data technology and advanced analytics and intelligence.
Hi, I'm McDevitt with Compliance Week, and today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my latest case study called The Banks Behind the Epstein Enterprise. The name Jeff Epstein is now synonymous with the words sex trafficker, pedophile, and monster, but there was a time when it wasn't. He cut a Jekyll Hyde figure for decades, living a life of luxury as a financier to the ultra-rich while operating a global sex trafficking enterprise in the shadows. And it was during this protracted time period that two prominent financial institutions enabled his commercial sex trafficking enterprise to thrive, be it blindly, knowingly, or perhaps somewhere in between. Those institutions were JP Morgan Chase and Deutsche Bank. The legal and moral culpability of these institutions is an angle of the Jeffrey Epstein story that never received much mainstream media attention. In the headlines, the banks were conveniently eclipsed by the man himself, yet they were an essential component of his criminal operation. Today, I'll share some snapshots of what each bank allowed to occur in relation to their accounts with Jeff Epstein, what red flags were overlooked or suppressed, what failures were made in customer due diligence and transaction monitoring, and what kind of corporate culture underlied these missteps. Lastly, I'll discuss steps banks can take to ensure they're spotting and appropriately acting on key indicators of criminal sex trafficking activity. Let's start with JP Morgan Chase. JP Morgan's relationship with Epstein lasted approximately from 1998 through 2013. The details of Epstein's onboarding are murky, but at any rate, he went on to have a long and flourishing relationship with JP Morgan. During the 15 years he was a client there, the bank opened and serviced 55 accounts for him, cumulatively worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He skirted public scrutiny for the first 5 or so years he was a client there, but that all changed in 2006 when he was arrested and indicted on felony charges of solicitation of underage prostitutes in Florida. But the bank kept him on as a client. By 2008, Epstein was a registered sex offender, and he was serving an 18-month prison sentence. By 2009, his non-prosecution agreement with the U.S. government had become public, revealing allegations he might have trafficked and engaged in illicit sexual conduct with minors. Yet JP Morgan did not terminate his accounts through all of this. One 2010 internal email between the Risk Management Division discussed new allegations against Epstein related to child trafficking. One employee wrote, "Are you still comfortable with this client who is now a registered sex offender?" The answer was apparently yes. Epstein remained a client for 3 more years. Now, one reason JP Morgan kept Epstein on as a client for as long as it did, despite recurring red flags and the filing of SARs dating back to at least 2002, was because of his relationship with a high-ranking executive. This executive and Epstein developed a close relationship. They exchanged approximately 1,200 emails between 2008 and 2012 from the executive's JP Morgan email account. The men allegedly exchanged pictures of young women and referred to them euphemistically as Disney characters, such as Beauty and the Beast, and also types of wine. Yet none of the emails exchanged between the men were flagged in connection with risk reviews of Epstein's accounts. The executive remained the Epstein relationship manager throughout his tenure at the institution. The bank even tasked him with discussing the human trafficking allegations with Epstein, which Epstein predictably explained away. It was just a few months after that executive left JP Morgan for Barclays in 2013 that a JP Morgan compliance officer terminated the Epstein relationship. Enter Deutsche Bank. When Epstein moved to Deutsche Bank in 2013, the bank designated him as an honorary, politically exposed person during onboarding, as opposed to the standard classification of PEP or PEP. This was apparently an invented designation just for Jeff Epstein. Deutsche Bank did classify him as high risk from the time of onboarding because of his 2008 plea deal and prison sentence. That high risk classification resulted in enhanced due diligence, at least technically speaking on paper. Deutsche Bank's overarching concern for reputational risk was apparent from the get-go. During onboarding discussions in 2013, Epstein's relationship manager in the bank's private wealth division allegedly suggested that all Epstein-related accounts be for entities affiliated with Epstein, not personal accounts. Within 3 months of onboarding, Epstein was transferring funds to alleged co-conspirators from his 2008 plea deal. Yet, Deutsche Bank went on to service more than 40 other Epstein-related accounts over a span of 5 years. By 2015, fresh allegations of sexual abuse and trafficking were trending in the media. An anti-money laundering compliance officer who was aware of these press reports escalated these and other concerns up the chain, culminating in the decision that Deutsche Bank's America's Reputational Risk Committee, or ARRC, would meet to determine whether the Epstein relationship should be terminated. 2 senior leaders from the bank's private wealth division visited Epstein at his New York townhouse to discuss the veracity of these allegations. The men held their meeting at a bar next to Epstein's indoor swimming pool. They asked Epstein questions relating to the concerns raised by the AML compliance officer. Now, in theory, they might have touched on any of the following red flags detected in Epstein's account's activity. Periodic large cash withdrawals, on average more than $200,000 per year, payments to Russian models and numerous women with Eastern European surnames, payments for women's school tuition, rent, and hotel expenses, and payments to individuals like Ghislaine Maxwell and others who were publicly alleged to have been co-conspirators in sexually abusing young women. However, these men took no notes at this meeting. There was no written record of this meeting at all. When the ARRC later met to decide on whether to terminate Epstein based on this visit, no notes were taken at that meeting either. A member of the ARRC sent a short and sweet email with their decision. The committee was comfortable with things continuing with Jeff Epstein, and while no explanation for the decision was given, the email did mention how another member of the committee had favorably noted a number of sizable deals recently. Only after the Miami Herald published its expose on Jeff Epstein in 2018, detailing the magnitude of his sex trafficking operation, did Deutsche Bank finally cut ties with him. Let's talk a little bit about human trafficking red flags. Red flags, or indicators, can be categorized in terms of either behavior or financial transactions. Behavioral indicators pertain to the appearance and conduct of the customer, while financial indicators focus on suspicious accounts activity. Both the U.S. Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network and the Intergovernmental Financial Action Task Force have published advisories and studies identifying long lists of tangible indicators of human trafficking, including in the area of sexual exploitation. Some of the key behavior and financial indicators of human sex trafficking are either starkly apparent or presumptively so in Epstein's case. In fact, certain details of Epstein's account's activity raise overlapping red flags, so this list is by no means exhaustive. One particular red flag is that if there are multiple accounts making repeated transfers to the same third party, or there are multiple individuals reporting similar information, such as a home address or phone number, that could be an indicator of human trafficking. When Epstein was a client of JP Morgan's, 20 of his victims were trafficked and abused by him. At least 20 victims trafficked and abused by him were paid through JP Morgan accounts a multitude of times between 2003 and 2013, in excess of $1 million collectively. Several of these women listed Epstein's New York apartments as their home address. Another red flag or indicator is a concentration of risk nationalities among the opening of accounts. Again, going back to JP Morgan, during the time in which Jeff Epstein was a customer, women recruited into his enterprise with Eastern European backgrounds and surnames were sometimes required to marry other Epstein victims in order to maintain their immigration status. Financial information reflected payments drawn from JP Morgan accounts to known recruiters. So this information should have caught the bank's attention. Another red flag. Customer accounts which display unusual withdrawal patterns, such as lump sum withdrawals. Over a 10-year time frame, Jeffrey Epstein withdrew more than $775,000 in cash from his accounts. More strikingly, when he was a customer of Deutsche Bank's over a 4-year time frame, his personal attorney, who made cash withdrawals on Epstein's behalf, he withdrew more than $800,000. In both cases, Epstein's exorbitant cash withdrawals were significant because he relied on mountains of cash to pay both hush money to his victims and finder's fees to his recruits. Another red flag. A customer avoids transactions that require identification documents or that trigger reporting requirements. Epstein's personal attorney had the authority to conduct transactions in Epstein's accounts on his behalf. Now again, over this 4-year time frame, that attorney made a total of 97 withdrawals from his accounts, roughly 2 to 3 times per month, all in the same amount of $7,500 per withdrawal, which was the bank's limit for third-party withdrawals. That attorney once asked bank personnel how often he could withdraw cash on Epstein's behalf without triggering an alert, a question which in and of itself should have triggered an alert. Another red flag. A relatively high or recurrent expenditure on items inconsistent with the customer's personal use or stated business activity, such as food, necessities, or accommodation for workers. Going back to Deutsche Bank. While Epstein held accounts at the bank, he used a trust account and various other accounts to send more than 120 wires totaling $2.65 million to beneficiaries of the trust, including some transfers to alleged co-conspirators or women with Eastern European surnames for the stated purpose of covering hotel expenses, tuition, and rent. Another indicator, media coverage. Media coverage of an account holder's activities relating to human trafficking in the sex trade and or prostitution rings. So this one's a straightforward one. While Epstein was a client of JP Morgan's, and this is a very striking example, Epstein paid more than $600,000 through his bank accounts to a woman who, according to news reports contained in JP Morgan's own due diligence records, Epstein, quote, purchased, unquote, at the age of 14. So that media information was right in their hands. I'm going to talk a little bit about behavioral indicators of victims of human sex trafficking. In at least one known case cited in a class action lawsuit against Deutsche Bank, Epstein and his co-conspirators forced a Jane Doe to open an account. Now, if this is true, possible questions for bank personnel who handled this Jane Doe's account and potential red flags raised might include: was a third party always present to speak on behalf of Jane Doe? Was Jane Doe an unqualified minor at the time the account was opened? Did Jane Doe ever show signs of poor hygiene, malnourishment, fatigue, bruising, or other signs of abuse? And did Jane Doe ever seem confused or provide scripted stories in response to questions? Now I'm going to talk a little bit about what banks can do. What can banks be doing to ensure that they are spotting and appropriately acting on key indicators of criminal sex trafficking activity. The chances of detecting criminal activities has improved significantly thanks to new approaches, software, and AI techniques such as entity resolution, natural language processing, large language models, and other developments. However, as JP Morgan Chase and Deutsche Bank illustrate, these resources do not compensate for underlying cultural problems. Both banks overruled risk management and compliance staff when red flags were escalated. Therefore, the sovereignty of the compliance function must be upheld in a number of ways. I'm going to mention three. Number one, a culture of compliance must be established from the top down. Number two, compensation for compliance personnel must be equivalent to counterparts in other business areas, i.e., profit centers. And number three, compliance must have a direct line to the company's independent board of directors. Lastly, if an institution has reasonable grounds to suspect a client of criminal activity, it should not feign plausible deniability, such as JP Morgan and Deutsche Bank might have done, but instead contact law enforcement. You can learn more about Epstein's dealings with JP Morgan Chase and Deutsche Bank by reading the Compliance Week case study, The Banks Behind the Epstein Enterprise. It's been a pleasure to speak with you today, and thank you for listening.